And welcome back to Whiskey Politics. I'm Dave Sussman, your host and purveyor at whiskeypolitics.net. You can find our television show at America's Voice News. Just look for Whiskey Politics. And also at YouTube, where if you find Whiskey Politics, please hit subscribe and also the notification bell, where you will be updated on all new upcoming episodes. And also our audio podcast series, which we are proud to be on the Ricochet Audio Network. You can also find us, Whiskey Politics, on iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play. And if you're listening on iTunes, please take a moment, give us a 5-star rating, any reviews, that helps others find us. With all of the news happening right now regarding the deep state and the Mueller investigation supposedly coming to a close and a lot of news coming out of the Trump White House, we are very happy today to have what we call a twofer interview. It's a rare situation. The first interview is going to be with Corey Lewandowski, former Trump campaign manager. He has a new book with David Bossie called Trump's Enemies. Trump's Enemies, how the deep state is undermining the presidency. And we're going to get into a lot of different issues on that. And then secondly, we're going to be introducing somebody that, and a subject that we haven't discussed here before in Whiskey Politics. It's actually a subject that I find extremely fascinating and I follow very closely from an economic standpoint as well as a historic standpoint, and that is about gold. We have a gentleman who's going to be joining us today. His name is Keith Weiner. He is from Monetary Metals, and he's going to be talking to us about a little known but really pivotal as far as the importance of it, a little known measure that's trying to get through the state assembly in the state of Nevada to allow gold to be used as a bond issuance, which will help the state take care of the employee pension issues that they are and many other states are dealing with. We're going to get into a lot of different discussions about gold and the history of it, and including one of my favorite shows that I like to watch on the Discovery Network called Gold Rush. So sit back, pour yourself your favorite beverage, and enjoy the twofer today with Corey Lewandowski and Keith Weiner at Whiskey Politics. So every day we seem to get a drip, drip, drip of information about the Mueller investigation. And while behind closed doors, now the lame duck Congress is investigating some of the little reported shenanigans by Democrats in the 2016 campaign. We wanted to discuss all this, pull it all apart, and put it back together again. And we're very happy to welcome by phone Corey Lewandowski, the former Trump campaign manager and co-author with David Bossie of the brand new book, Trump's Enemies, How the Deep State is Undermining the Presidency. Welcome, Corey. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me today.
Thanks. Great book, by the way, and very timely. Real quickly, before we get into the book itself, as I understand it, you joined the Trump team in early 2015, some 6 months before he came down that escalator. How did that happen?
You know, I was very lucky. Actually, my co-author on the book, Dave Bossie, had a long relationship with then Mr. Trump. And Mr. Trump had been asking for Dave to find him a campaign manager to see if he would really consider running for president. And Dave called me, and long story short, I went to New York, and then Mr. Trump hired me on the spot to start pursuing and putting together a team for a potential run for president. And 6 months later, he comes down the escalator, and a year and a half after that, he's the president of the United States.
That must have been a phenomenal experience for you personally. I mean, that's incredible, seeing it from the very beginning stages of the campaign all the way through to where it is today. Now, just so our folks understand it, you're still advising him, although you're not part of the inner team, right? Is that correct?
Right. Yeah, so I don't work in the White House. I am a formal member of the Vice President's Political Action Committee, and so that's a role. But I travel very regularly with the president, spend a lot of time with him leading up into the midterm elections. I have a very special privilege of talking to him on a regular basis. And so, for some reason, he still likes my advice and counsel.
Now, in your book, and I want to get to the book here quickly here, because you discuss the deep state. A lot of news happening today, in fact, as we're speaking, that supposedly the Mueller investigation is coming to a close soon. How did the deep state manifest itself into the Mueller investigation, do you think?
Well, it's very simple. And look, this book, and let me just define what the deep state is so your listeners can understand it. The deep state is really individuals who transition from one administration to the next administration, regardless of if a Republican or Democrat is elected. It's the same thing that Ronald Reagan complained about. It's the same thing Barack Obama complained about. It's those individuals who really have no accountability. And in this particular case, we're talking about members from the intelligence community. Unfortunately, all the names you know, Clapper and Comey and Brennan, and the people who were tasked with ensuring America's secrets, protecting us from Russian interference. And what we found out that they did was they went after people from the Trump campaign with their badges. These were the senior members of law enforcement. They went after them with their badges because they didn't like their politics. And that should be a very cautious lesson for anybody, regardless of Republican or Democrat, conservative or liberal. We should never allow that to happen. But that's what Comey did. And Clapper and Brennan, they put in place an insurance policy through the FBI to try and make sure Donald Trump, A, was never elected, and then B, never served a day after he got elected.
You know, in the book, and again, we have Corey Lewandowski with us. He just came out with a great new book here, Trump's Enemies. And you talk about a group of people that came into the administration after the election. You call them the November the 9th Club. Can you talk about that?
Sure. The November the 9th Club are the people who didn't support candidate Trump when he was running, didn't vote for him on Election Day, but then found a way to weasel their way into the government to move their own agenda forward. And so let me be clear. There are people who weren't with candidate Trump when he was running, but came on to the team and have been phenomenal supporters. And I think of people like Nikki Haley and Mike Pompeo, people who were supporting other candidates in the primary, but once they joined the administration, are all on board. The November 9th Club people, Sean Spicer, Gary Cohn, Rob Porter, Rex Tillerson, these people who didn't want to see the president be successful and had their own agenda, including taking papers off of the president's desk so that he didn't sign them. That is a phenomenal thing when you think about it. The staff didn't like the way he was renegotiating bad trade deals, and so they used their positions around the president to stop his agenda for their own edification, and that's a very, very bad thing. We call out those people in the book.
Yeah, you talk about, I mean, you guys don't have any problem mentioning names in this book, and it's there's a lot of transparency here, and I want to get back into some of those names here in just a minute. But one of the things that I found to be most interesting is this long form interview that both you and David Bossie had with Donald Trump in the Oval Office, and he was really open about a lot of different things. One of the things that really got me was his discussion about the media and fake news, and you know, a lot of people in the media are clutching pearls, talking about how Trump is trying to threaten the First Amendment and the media and the Fourth Estate and all of this. But he really does have a concern about what he calls fake news. A lot of us would agree with that. Does he feel like he has a responsibility? And what he shared with you in the book, I think, alludes to this regarding informing American citizens who may not be paying that close attention to what's going on with the fake media?
Absolutely. Look, Dave Bossie and I were so lucky for this book. We had the opportunity to interview the president. It's the only interview he did for a book in the first 2 years of his administration. So we were very fortunate. And in that wide-ranging interview, we asked him, what is the biggest challenge for you, and what is the biggest challenge to the American people? What do you see that as? And he said the fake news. And he goes on to say he's okay with bad stories if they're accurate. But when we see stories that we know to be sourced to anonymous places or are just factually wrong, and the media runs the story and then every other outlet picks it up, that's what is a disservice. And this president, I think, is very proud of the fact that he's educated the American people that the news is fake and that a lot of it is just not true. And that's a significant accomplishment for him because of the way he's been treated by the media, the falsehoods that they've spread about him and his team members. And look, in full disclosure, I'm not a fan of some of the people who worked at the organization, Paul Manafort, Roger Stone, these guys. But some of the things that the media has said about them are just factually inaccurate. And the American people now see through that. And hopefully he is forcing the media to have a better and much more honest relationship with the American people.
You talk about Manafort, and we talk about fake news here. He was reported, and it was all over the news last week, to have met with Julian Assange at the Ecuadorian embassy. The media were giddy about this, and I know that you were asked about this on interviews just as the news were coming out. They included Jerome Corsi in this whole triangle. This apparently never happened, right?
Well, that's exactly right, and that's exactly the point. So the Guardian newspaper reports that Paul Manafort sometime supposedly in early 2016, prior to his tenure with the Trump campaign, went over to London to the Ecuadorian embassy to meet with Julian Assange of WikiLeaks. Now, London is a city that has a significant amount of surveillance. There's no surveillance footage of him doing it. There's no surveillance footage or written documentation of him ever going into the Ecuadorian embassy. There's no his passports have been removed from him because he's in a prison cell. There's no documentation in his passport that he ever went into the country. And so, look, that's the stuff that's fake news. And it didn't matter that it was just a sole source story. Every left-wing outlet from CNN to MSNBC ran with this, that this was the missing link for the Russia collusion story, that Paul Manafort went there. We now have come to find out it doesn't look like he ever went there. But it didn't stop them for 2 or 3 days of running a story, which was just completely not true.
Yeah, yeah. Now, you refer to some of the names that were mentioned in the book and some of the transparency that Donald Trump had with you in that Oval Office meeting with both you and David Bossie. Okay, let's kind of pull this apart a little bit here. I know you're tight for time, but Comey admitted he leaked stories to the media. McCabe, criminal referral. Strzok, Page, they're gone. By the way, why is Bruce Orr still employed by the government?
It's the single greatest question. Look, he was the number 4 person at the Justice Department. His wife, Nellie Orr, was a paid employee to Fusion GPS, which is what created the fake dossier. We know unequivocally that after the dossier was created, Nellie Orr gave it to her husband, Bruce, who, by the way, had nothing to do with the elections process, but he took that document and brought it over to the FBI personally and either handed it to Andy McCabe, Peter Strzok, or Jim Comey. And then Jim Comey, we know unequivocally, presented that false dossier to then President-elect Trump in January of 2017 and immediately leaked it. And so it went from a unverified, salacious document to now a document that was presented to President-elect Trump in a classified briefing. And so that's where this whole thing started. And there's been no accountability either from Bruce Orr or anybody else at the FBI.
Yeah, and I mean, when we take a look at this, this goes back well before the actual election. So, I mean, Crossfire Hurricane, which is a great Rolling Stones documentary, nothing to do with the Stones. This talks about this, and you kind of refer to this in the book. Was candidate Trump spied on?
He not only was, I believe, he spied on, but obviously members of his team and volunteers to the presidential campaign. Look, Carter Page and George Papadopoulos had no formal role in the campaign whatsoever. They were never paid by the campaign. They were never given a campaign email address. They had no role. They were strictly volunteers. They had a very minor, volunteering effort, actually. But these people were spied on because of their politics, not because of who they were, but because of who they were potentially associated next to, which was the Trump campaign. And they were spied on American soil. And the FISA warrants that were issued for them, the first Pfizer application was actually denied because it was so overtly political. Only 2% of Pfizer applications are ever denied. And the first one was denied by the Justice Department. It got denied by the FISA court because the judge said, this looks like you want to spy on somebody because of their politics. And so it was denied. They came back 4 months later with articles to validate the FISA application that they placed. The FBI actually placed these articles with reporters. We know Fusion GPS was paying reporters. They then took those articles that the reporters wrote and put them into the FISA application, and then the next FISA application was approved. And it was until 2017, June of 2017, when the last renewal was conducted. So they were literally still spying on individuals while Donald Trump or his staff or his team was the sitting president of the United States.
Wow. You know, we recently had Sebastian Gorka on for a long-form interview, and he suggested that Trump may be holding on to some highly damaging files on certain Democrats. And I asked Sebastian this firsthand. I said, why wouldn't the president have released them before the 2018 election? And will he release them before 2020 if he has them?
Well, it's a great question. Look, I think this president knows many of the players who could potentially be candidates against him in 2020. And what we know about this president and what we've seen about him as a candidate is when someone attacks him, he punches back times 10. He's a great counterpuncher. And if they are going to get into the gutter with the president, this is a person who loves the street fight. He's willing to do what it takes to win. And I think the American people love a fighter. So if he's attacked, I think he will use every resource that is legal at his disposal to make sure that people know what his opponents are up to.
Last question for you, and I do greatly appreciate you taking the time, Corey. You ran his campaign. You still advise this president. After the 2018 election, I should say, a lot of people have suggested that Trump lost the suburban women vote, many of whom voted for him in 2016. Is this a discussion that's taking place right now in the 2020 campaign? I don't know if you're privy to that or having discussions with him. How to win back those votes in 2020?
Absolutely. It's very important that we have a robust effort to win back those votes and also to expand our coalition to make sure that we're looking at African Americans and Hispanic Americans and Asian Americans. And look, right now, because of the strength of the economy, the African American unemployment rate and the Hispanic American unemployment rate are at the lowest ever recorded. And what we're seeing is those individuals are coming to support Donald Trump because of his economic policies, because of the opportunity to grow. We need to expand that base if Donald Trump is going to be successful in the 2020 campaign.
Very good. Corey Lewandowski, former Trump campaign manager, co-author of the new book, Trump's Enemies, How the Deep State is Undermining the Presidency. Thank you so much for joining us, and would love to have you back on down the road and maybe even your boss.
It would be my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Corey.
To make that happen. Okay.
Pleasure. Thank you, sir. Take care. Bye-bye. How does an 18-year-old in your situation feel like he believes in conservative and liberty-based values?
So growing up in a public high school outside of Chicago, I was inundated with culturally Marxist, postmodernist ideas before I even realized what those terms even meant. And it would always be about the forming of America, put simply, as I was taught, was an illegal formation, stealing the lands from indigenous people, built on the ideas of white supremacy, oppressing those that could not defend themselves, building a patriarchy and exploiting anyone that... So everything that you hear from the modern Democrat Party, I was experiencing when I was 14 years old. And I remember, being 14 or 15, asking my teachers questions saying, well, there has to be something good that this country has done before. Oh, no, it's been all terrible, it's been all evil, it's a disaster. So you have one of two choices. You can either conform or you can challenge. Those are the two things you can do, and I decided to challenge respectfully. And I found on YouTube, back when YouTube wasn't what it is today, back in like 2006, I was, YouTubing videos of Thomas Sowell and Milton Friedman of how to defend the free market. And I ended up, after one YouTube video, I knew more about economics than my economics teacher, because obviously she had no idea what she was talking about. She came in from a Keynesian Marxist perspective. But I realized quite quickly I was given a gift of being able to have the gift of language, the gift of dialogue, and to be able to challenge people rather quickly, but that I also had an equal amount of enthusiasm and passion for that sort of conflict and that sort of discussion, because it's important. And I realized there were a lot of people in my class and a lot of people in my local high school that agreed with me. And so I found this passion very early on, and I'm not alone. There are millions of high school students that are going through the same discovery process, through finding our videos, reading the great books, reading Ayn Rand, you name it. And they're pushing back against the Marxist dominance in our high schools and eventually our colleges. And so I was just lucky enough to do something about it and be successful.
And welcome back to Whiskey Politics. Again, I'm Dave Sussman, your host and purveyor at whiskeypolitics.net. And if you haven't already done so, please find us on YouTube, where you can click subscribe and the notification button. You can find us on America's Voice News and America's Voice Live. You can find that at americasvoicenews.com and all of your favorite platforms, such as Roku, Amazon Fire, and the like. And of course, you can find our podcast series at the Ricochet Audio Network. And you can find Whiskey Politics and all of your favorite podcast applications, iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and all the rest. You know, a lot of discussions over the past few years regarding the level of debt in the United States. It isn't just the United States. It is a worldwide phenomenon. It isn't just sovereign debt in the United States, but it's also based in each state. We're seeing right now that there is a pension crisis in certain states, including California. And one of the biggest issues facing California and other states in the future is how to compensate for all of those government employees in their retirement. Some of the discussions regarding debt have opened up a lot of options and alternatives, and one such alternative is a discussion about a gold bond. There are certain states that have already implemented this, from what I understand, and a precedent has been set. But there is an act, I guess there is a legislation that is taking place right now in the state of Nevada for this to happen. And to discuss all of this, we're very pleased to have Keith Weiner, who is the CEO of Monetary Metals. And Keith, you are currently right now, if I understand correctly, in Australia. Is that correct?
Yes, Sydney, Australia.
Yeah, nice to have you. Thanks for joining us early tomorrow morning, I think. You're in the future. You can see what's going to happen tomorrow.
That's right. It's Wednesday morning here.
Thanks for joining us. So tell us a little bit about, first and foremost, a little bit about Monetary Metals, what you guys do over there, and what you're currently doing right now with the gold bond.
So our vision at Monetary Metals is to pay interest on gold. We think that a working gold standard is when anybody who wants to can deposit gold and earn interest on gold. And so that's our business. The purpose of this, there's a why to this. And the why is we have a monetary system that's failing because it accumulates debt exponentially, and eventually that's going to be a real problem. And so we want to see the world transition to the gold standard, and to do that, you need to pay interest on gold. Interest is the only force that will pull gold out of private hoards and into the market.
So I'm not a huge student of gold and precious metals, but I know enough politics probably to get me in trouble. So I understand correctly, I guess was it President Roosevelt in 1933 that made gold illegal? Is that correct?
That's right. It was just like cocaine is today. It was a criminal act. It doesn't go to prison if you got caught possessing it.
Right. And then in 1974, President Ford overturned that. He made it legal, and that is now some 46 years ago, whatever that was, 44 years ago. That's how good my math is. But when we take a look at what's happened in the past 44 years since President Ford made gold a legal, I guess, a commodity or legal tender, what exactly happened in the past 4 decades with gold, and whether or not it has become usable as a legal tender?
So it's not legal tender, although there are a few states that now have state statutes that recognize it as that. It basically is treated as a commodity or as tangible personal property. Mm-hmm. And so what Roosevelt did in 1933, perhaps even more importantly than confiscating it, was he broke all the gold bonds and all the long-term gold contracts like leases that had been, payable in gold, and said now they're only payable in terms of the government's now irredeemable, dollar, at least irredeemable to Americans. What Nixon did in 1971 was he finished it off and made it irredeemable even to foreign central banks. So today we have this dollar, it's irredeemable. That means you cannot go to the bank and push a $20 bill or any amount of bills over the counter and get redeemed for gold in exchange. We just have this debt-based piece of paper, and that's how we pay debts. We pay debt using the debt paper, and so that's why debt grows exponentially. You can never pay it off. You can only shift it around.
Okay. So obviously, sovereign debt in the United States is at astronomical levels, $22 trillion, and that's before unfunded liabilities. How does implementing a gold bond alleviate that, or on a state level? How does that help?
It gives people a transition path to the use of gold. So today, people can own gold, but as Warren Buffett made this statement, which is both true and disingenuous at the same time. He says gold has no utility. It's neither procreative nor useful. And so people own gold, but basically they're waiting for the price to go up, or they're waiting for Armageddon. Frankly, I hope we never see Armageddon. And so that turns gold into something that people buy for its price to go up, and then they sell it to get more dollars. So gold doesn't really play any role economically. It can help protect people personally from the ravages of dollar debasement, but it does nothing economically. The gold bond will begin to draw gold into circulation. It will begin to create a monetary system around gold, not by saving the dollar. The dollar is irredeemable in more ways than one, but by giving people an alternative that they can start to use. And just as importantly, to the issuer, give the issuer a way to actually get out of debt. So what we're proposing to Nevada is when they issue the gold bond, they have the buyers tender outstanding Nevada debt paper. So people will say how much Nevada bonds they're willing to redeem to get the new gold bond. And that's an entirely new mechanism that doesn't exist in the world today.
What did I read about other states that have set a precedent for this then? What was that?
So the first one would be Utah, that created a law that, number one, removed the capital gains tax on gold and silver. So one of the most annoying obstacles to the adoption of gold, you might sit down to a restaurant and have a meal and say, okay, the meal was, $20 or whatever, and pay one silver eagle. The problem is the IRS wants you to keep a ledger of when you bought that eagle and what the price was. And then when you trade that eagle for your steak dinner, that's considered to be a sale at the current market price. And then you would have to book a capital gain or capital loss. And so the reporting requirements are even worse than the tax that you'd pay on that. And so that's one of the things that keeps gold and silver from being useful. So Utah removes that capital gains tax and goes further and says, in the state of Utah, gold and silver are legal tender to pay debts. Now, a word of explanation is necessary for that. A lot of people think that legal tender means that if you're a merchant and you're selling goods, let's say you have a hardware store and you're selling 2x4s, that you have to take dollars. That's not true. You can say what we charge silver. What legal tender does is it says if you owe money to somebody and then you tender US dollars, then no court will demand that you pay anything else. That's payment in full. You are settled. And if the creditor doesn't like it, then he can refuse it, but you're out of debt. And so it's important for people to be able to borrow in gold, that there be a legal recognition of that.
So when you're talking about a gold bond, and we're not talking about the over-the-counter skin products that exist out there, when you're talking about a gold bond, so tell me how this is utilized as a mechanism. There's interest that is paid, and that pays off the debt. Explain that.
So today, the state of Nevada, if I remember right, has about $11 billion in outstanding debt. The problem for the state, right, so in order for something like this to work, there has to be a reason for investors to want to buy it, and there has to be a reason for the issuer to want to sell it. Well, it's pretty obvious why investors would buy a gold bond, so we won't dwell on that too much. But why would the state issue the gold bond? And the first reason is that today the state has a price exposure. Because its revenues come in from taxing the gold mining companies, if the price of gold drops, the revenues measured in dollars drop. And so that causes the state to have a budget deficit. Now, the way I'll frame this, and maybe your listeners can appreciate this, politicians love deficits. What they don't love is unexpected or surprise deficits. So if the price of gold drops 10% and then their revenues from this tax drops 10%, then nobody's happy, and all the constituents are calling the politicians saying, "You promised us a balanced budget. What's up with this?" Well, it was the drop in the price of gold, which they had neither the ability to foresee nor the ability to do anything about it. So by taking back some of their paper debt and replacing it with gold debt, now they have a match of their gold income, which is a tax on mining, matches the debt service for the bond, which is in gold. So if the price of gold goes up, both the income and the debt service go up. If the price of gold drops, then both of them go down. And so that fixes a problem for the state. But the other mechanism, how do they get out of debt with this, is they can say to the market, okay, we're selling, let's put some numbers to this. Let's say it's a 100-ounce gold bond, and the price of gold right now is about, just to make the math easy, $1,200. Mm-hmm. So 100 ounces is worth $120,000. So they're saying, okay, we're auctioning off a 100-ounce gold bond, bring in outstanding Nevada paper bonds, and tell us how much you're willing to bring in. That's your bid. And so the market, I think at first, will bring in about $120,000 worth of paper bonds and redeem them. That is, turn them in exchange for the new gold bond, because the gold bond is a superior, it's higher quality instrument. What I think will happen is people will realize, if you had a choice, and I'll posit this question to listeners. Suppose you had a choice of two bonds. They had the same issuer, they had the same maturity, the same credit risks. One of them promises to pay you $120,000 in the year 2028, 10-year bond, and one of them promises to pay you 100 ounces of gold. Which would you choose? So what will happen if Nevada moves forward with this is we'll have a market wherein people can express this preference. They can say, well, I prefer the gold, and I prefer the gold by turning in slightly more than $120,000 worth of paper. So the state is getting out of debt and doing so at a discount.
Okay. All right. Well, we're going to take a quick break right here, but after the break, I want to come back and want to talk about how this can benefit paying down some of the debts, as well as the government and the individual investors themselves, and a little bit more about what's going on in the gold industry. We'll be right back here. Looking forward to continuing this with Keith Weiner here at Whiskey Politics. And Dave Sussman back with you at Whiskey Politics, and I'm delighted to have Keith Weiner, who is talking about an interesting financial instrument, which is now being discussed in Nevada, or is it Nevada? I used to live there. I should know how to say this. So first of all, let's finish up on the discussion point that we were just talking about before the break. And how does gold debt benefit the government?
So two ways. One is it's a natural hedge against the price exposure that they currently have. So today they get, let's say it's $100 million in tax from the gold mining. Mm-hmm. The price of gold drops 10%, then that goes down to $90 million. But of course, their debt service, being denominated in dollars, remains at $100 million. So they have a surprise budget deficit. So by redenominating the debt that they're servicing with their gold income in gold, then no longer do they have this price risk. Mm-hmm. And I think governments and businesses should be thinking about reducing risk. The second thing is that it gives the state a way to redeem its paper debt and replace it with gold debt, which it can amortize and pay off because it has a gold income. And so it's get out of debt at a discount, and it's remove the price exposure to which they're currently exposed. Those are the two benefits to the state.
Okay. As far as I understand, gold has always been utilized as a hedge against inflation, right? I mean, it's one of the things is that monetary policy by the Federal Reserve, when they're printing all this money, when you have quantitative easing that's flooding the financial markets, there was a concern, and there was a huge concern. A lot was written about this, especially in 2010, with the Federal Reserve playing around with this, trying to keep, obviously, the financial services industry industry afloat, and cash, is the lifeblood of the economy. We didn't really see much in the way of inflation. From a retrospective standpoint, and from your perspective, obviously well-versed in this industry, why didn't we see that inflationary index increase, CPI, at the level that many people predicted?
Well, the short answer is the mainstream theory. So the mainstream theory is the quantity theory of money, right? So if you double the quantity of money, then you double the general price level. The short answer is the theory isn't true.
Okay.
So I've written a lot about this, but essentially we're in this falling interest rate environment since 1981. And what happens is everybody goes deeper and deeper into debt. And I posit the question this way. Suppose you're a farmer and you owe $1 million. What is the one thing that we can count on you to do? And the answer is grow as much wheat as you possibly can and dump that into the market in the desperate attempt to raise enough cash to service that $1 million in debt. And so as everyone goes deeper and deeper into debt, they become more and more desperate and more creative to produce more and more in order to service their debt. And so you see that prices are soft. They're not relentlessly rising as they were in the 1970s. Prices are soft and in many markets actually falling. We see it again now, crude oil.
Okay, so when you take a look at what's happened with gold as far as an index goes, I mean, it's been kind of static, right? I mean, what are we right now, about $1,300 between? It's been $1,200, $1,300, and a little bit up and a little bit down for quite some time. What's going on there?
Well, I think obviously anybody who's looking for what asset to buy because it's going up is not going to be looking at gold. So for quite a while they were looking at Bitcoin, and now of course those people got crushed. And I shouldn't laugh. I mean it's tragic. When people think of gold as simply a bet on price action, then it's kind of a Ouija board. When all the thumbs on that little plastic thing want to push it south, then it's going south for a while. And now arguably there's a basing action where it's not really going down. It's not going up at the moment. And I think what it's going to take to make the price go up is either great fear, right? So the great thing about gold, forget inflation hedge, is that gold does not default. Gold is not anyone else's liability. And when you start to worry about GE, General Electric has $100 billion in bonds outstanding that are starting to trade like junk. When you start to look at the European banking system and the word bail-in keeps coming up,
right.
Suddenly, it's a pretty good idea to hold gold. And so I use the analogy. Do you remember when Cyprus collapsed, the banking system and almost the entire society collapsed?
Yep.
Well, if you had gold in Cyprus, I apologize, my phone is ringing off to the side. If you had gold, you were safe from that. If you had a euro deposit in a Cyprus bank, then you lost your money.
Right.
And so it wasn't that the price was going up, it's that gold was safe.
Gotcha.
The other thing that can drive the price of gold up is something like a bond that people begin to realize gold is moving into the monetary system, and then there will be a lot of excitement in owning gold when that happens.
Gotcha. Keith, this is fascinating. Where can people learn more about this?
So we have some articles on our website, which is www.monetary-metals.com.
Okay.
There's a little search box, and you can search on gold bonds in Nevada. And I think we've put out half a dozen or so, articles and pieces about it.
Okay, so folks, find Keith, find more information about what he's talking about here with the gold bond, and you can find him again at monetary/metals.com. We'll have the link up under this episode, and thank you for taking the time early tomorrow morning in Australia to explain this. Greatly appreciate it, Keith.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. And folks, don't forget to continue to find us at all of your podcast applications of choice. Just look for Whiskey Politics, America's Voice News, Ricochet.com, and YouTube. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and we'll be back again real soon at Whiskey Politics. Again, a very special thank you to our guest today. We'll be back soon with Whiskey Politics. Take care.